had this conversation with this friend of mine named Tim. I've known Tim since I was back in junior high. And he was telling me about this other friend of ours that we played some jazz band with for our freshman year. His name was Arlen, and Arlen was our keyboard player, and he was incredibly smart. So smart that actually he really, truly is a rocket scientist now. Tim and I aren't. Arlen made it. And he was telling me about this time when he and Arlen, they were neighbors. And he said we really didn't have much in common but we were neighbors and we were friends, you know. And he said, so we're on the bus one day, and he said some kid begins to mess with Arlen and kind of shove him around and push him, you know. And bullying did exist in the 70s, you know. And so he's bullying Arlen, and he said I sat there for a while, and he said I really didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to be heroic, but he said I just got to the point where I was just tired of seeing Arlen being pushed around. And he said, I finally just stood up and I just looked this guy in the face and he said, hey, leave him alone or I'm going to beat the stuffings out of you. Except he didn't say stuffings. Well, he said, Steve, I sat down and he said, the first thing that came to my mind was that I had to go, my dad would find out certainly because, you know, parents always find out, right? And so he said, I went and I sat down and I thought, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. See, Tim's dad, Gene Tenon, was a decorated Missouri highway patrolman, held in high honor because he had actually been shot in the line of duty at one point in time. And although he was that person, he had taught Tim, we don't fight. They just don't care what we don't fight. The other thing you need to know about Gene Tenon was he was also a dedicated deacon at the Salem Avenue Baptist Church, Rolla, Missouri. And so he had also taught Tim, you don't fight and you don't say stuff like stuffings, if you know what I mean. And he said, I knew I was going to get it. He said, I went home, I knew my dad was going to find out. Finally, I thought, okay, maybe if I tell him before he finds out, it'll be better. So he said, I just kind of do that thing as a kid where you just kind of barge in the room and say, Dad, I got to tell you something. And so he said, I just told him the whole thing. He said, I even told him that I had said stuffings. And he said, my dad just kind of sat there, you know, looked down, looked at me, looked down. Finally, all he said was, well, Tim, it looks like to me that you did the right thing. Tim said, he said, honestly, I couldn't believe it. He said, I was just ready for like the highest form of discipline. He said, I walked back to my room. So a week later, he's in his room and he hears this kind of commotion. And he realizes that Arlen's mom and dad have come over to his house on a Friday night to visit with his folks, and they're drinking coffee or whatever, and said they're talking. And he said, if my mom comes to my room, knocks on the door, what do you want? You know, you need to come out here. He says, I'm thinking again, oh my gosh, my dad had a chance to think about it again. Now I'm going to get spanked even worse. So he comes back out. He comes out in the living room, and the Morses are there, and Arlen's there, and his mom and dad are there, and he's just thinking the worst. He says, you know, he's standing there just ready for it to be delivered. And said, his mom says, you know, the Morses have something to say to you. Well, Mrs. Morse says, Tim, Arlen came home and he told us everything you did and what you said. He looks at his father. He says, and we just want to tell you, thank you very much for doing what you did. Well, you're welcome. And then they said, and we would like you to give Arlen tough guy lessons. Tim said, I looked up and said, excuse me? He said, well, obviously that you had what it took in that situation, and Arlen didn't. And we just want you to come over every week and give our little Arlen tough guy lessons. And he said, Steve, I would have been better apt to give Arlen like wuss boy lessons. I just had like one heroic moment in my life, and he said, I wasn't up to it. Somehow he said, I went back to my room. His mom said, I'll take care of it. You know, he didn't have to make any kind of professional career out of giving tough boy lessons. That never happened. But I was just thinking, as Tim was telling me that story, I was thinking to myself, how often, and I don't know how it happened. We actually talked about, you know, what went on in the Morses' living room after that whole incident, that they would come down on a Friday night. Somehow what happened, I can only imagine, is they was like, okay, this is something our son needs. He needs this. He can't defend himself. And maybe we're supposed to give that to him, but we don't have that in us, and so we're going to look around, and Tim was the only seeming tough guy that they knew. And I just realized that so often in parenting, and I think all of us do it in some way, not always a bad thing, is that we see something in our children, don't we? That we feel like they need a skill or a particular character quality, and we say, hey, I don't have this, can you do this? One of our sons was interested in hunting and fishing when he was in junior high. And honestly, that's not something I do. And so we found Ernie Franklin, one of our guys here, and said, hey, Ernie, he wants to learn how to shoot and fish. And, could you kind of do that? And I felt badly as a parent. But I also knew if I gave my son shooting lessons that one of us might possibly end up with a bullet hole in us. Okay? I didn't have the skill, And so we do that sometimes. And it's okay. Most of the time. But there's one responsibility. There's one responsibility that we have as parents that is given to us. And no matter how hard we try and how insecure we feel about it, folks, we cannot abdicate that responsibility. Our responsibility is given to us. And we find it in Deuteronomy 6:4. We talk about that passage quite a bit here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God. The Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength. And then it says a couple verses later, it says, teach these to your children. Matter of fact, my translation says basically, repeat that over and over to your children. It is the one responsibility that we have, and it cannot be abdicated. It cannot be given over to someone else. We have the responsibility to teach. And I think it's a reason that God says, love me with all your heart and mind and strength. And Jesus even adds soul to it and when he talks about it in Matthew. It's this idea that we are to take our child's complete life. Complete life. We have a way of compartmentalizing things, but they want us to take everything in our child's, our gifts, his gifts and personality, his abilities, those things that we talked about this last week a little bit, and that we help them bring those all under the lordship of Jesus, and that we teach them to use those things for his purposes, right? Every summer for how many years, probably 40 years, Boulevard Christian Church has sent our young people to a conference put on by an organization called Christ in Youth, CIY. You'll hear everybody, kids are going to go to CIY. Organization Christ in Youth started in Tulsa about 50 years ago, now has been based in Joplin. For years, if you went to a CIY conference, you would make a decision. You would either make a decision to rededicate your life to Jesus, or a decision to give your life over to Jesus, or you would dedicate yourself to what they call full-time service. Lots of kids did that over the years. About 20 years ago or so, I'm going to say that they came on to this idea of a kingdom worker. Hey, I've rededicated my life. I've become a Christian. Not necessarily interested in becoming a person who works at a church full time, but I do have these gifts and talents, and I want to use those in my life. They came up with the term kingdom worker. And here's how they define kingdom worker. It is a person who uses their gifts and abilities and spheres of influence for Jesus' kingdom, not their own. Great definition. And you can take kingdom worker and you can say a kingdom family, or it's a family who uses their gifts and abilities and spheres of influence for Jesus' kingdom, not their own. You can put a kingdom parent in there. You can put a kingdom kid. Children, young people who use their gifts and abilities and spheres of influence for Jesus' kingdom, not their own. Not their own. And we are called to be kingdom parents who are raising kingdom children. That in that process of teaching our kids to love God with all their heart, soul, and strength, that basically, and I know it's a responsibility, but I think it's an incredible opportunity and even an adventure. That as a parent and as a grandparent right now, that we are looking for opportunities to identify our kids' gifts and abilities, as we've talked about, and them try to infuse in them the fact that God has placed in them, that in them, to be used in some way for God's kingdom. He is the giver, and he has an agenda, and the goal is not to live by my agenda. The goal is to live and use those things for his agenda. That's pretty cool. We've been talking about the last couple weeks, words that inspire worth. And I've tried to communicate to you in maybe some subtle ways that this is not about just being a better husband or helping our wife be a better wife or helping our kids be better kids, but it's more about actually inspiring the worth, the God-given value and purpose. You might even use the word destiny that God has given us and our children. Well, I would ask you just for a moment just to relax, just to draw breath. Because I know this can come across as heavy, like, oh, I just want to abdicate that. I don't feel up to that, Steve. I just want to, maybe can the children's ministry do that for me? Can I have one of the staff members? Can I call somebody who's better qualified? Listen, please know, what I'm going to call this morning kingdom parenting is not about perfection. It's not perfect parenting. It is purposeful parenting. It's not perfect parenting, but it is intentional parenting. It's not perfect parenting, but it is, I'm going to say, parenting that ponders. Moseys a little bit in the decision-making process. Ask the right questions before the decisions are made as to what the purpose of my child is and what he's going to be involved in or not be involved in. And I've told you last week, and I will say it again because it just needs to be said, that parenting is not easy, right? I mean, parenting's tough. It is tough. And even if you do it really, really well, there are no promises, right, that our kids are going to become all that we dream for them to become. And that's painful. That's a painful thing. But I've cut this down, just kind of tried to make it as simple as I can so you guys can have something that you can take home. So I have 2 points. My first point is simply this. It is a walk that inspires worth. Kingdom parenting comes from us walking in a way that inspires worth. You probably heard me say before, but it's something important to me that my dad would say often to me as I was growing up. Steve, my dad, his dad, Emmett Moss, had a good name in our community. A good name. Said he was a man who paid his bills on time. He was a man who, if he had another neighbor, a farmer, who was sick, during hay cutting season, Dad would gather some of the other local guys and they would go over and they would cut hay. He said, I remember him loading the wagon up and taking it down with, kind of the first fruits down to the church as his tithe. He had a good name. And I thought to myself, even as a young man, I want to have that name. I have his name. There's a walk. That's a walk that inspires confidence, an example set in life that inspires worth. And so we have this walk that we need. And I want to make this, it's not necessarily easy, but it doesn't have to be difficult. It's something that we can do, folks, as parents. Listen to what Paul says to these people who are Hanyans, who are Henri cusses, who are getting more wrong than right in the city of Corinth. And these are followers of Jesus, by the way. He says this, and you should imitate me just as I imitate Christ. It's like he imagines these people are just lies, or just chaotic, and they're just going in all these kind of different directions. And they're just doing so many wrong things, and the Corinthians were really getting it wrong. And he finally just kind of says, hey, let me make this simple. Just, you imitate me, okay? You just follow me as I follow Christ. Hey, that's doable. Imitate, you follow my steps as I follow the steps of Christ. A number of years ago, I began to be quite honestly, began to be overwhelmed with the idea of being a leader here at our church. And it just more and more the thought came to my mind, I don't have that. I am not that. I'm not that guy who's stands up there with confidence and says, follow me. I didn't see myself in that. And someone said this to me, or I read it. I'm not sure where I got it. He said, think about leading instead of being a leader. Now, that may not mean much to you, but for me, it was like all of a sudden it took this pressure off. Like this leader was this image, this picture, this person in a frame, put your own hero in there. And I thought, I can't be that. But can I lead? Can I just lead people by following Christ? And so I began to decide, I'm just going to, on a daily basis, I'm just going to do my best to try to do what Christ is doing and try to follow his path. And if some other people want to follow, great. I can't make them. Maybe it takes a little bit of the heat off of it. So we're called to follow Christ as parents, as kingdom persons, as kingdom parents, so our children can follow, right? And hopefully we're going to set a path for them, and they're going to learn about life from us. Now, that doesn't always happen. When I was in high school, actually, I'll say about a month and a half ago, I went back to my high school 40th reunion. And I see a girl named Carrie Miller Vincent. She was Carrie Miller when I was in high school. Well, Carrie Miller was this sweet Christian girl. I'd known Carrie since we were in elementary school, like second grade. And she just happened to be, got a little crush on her, and it happened to be the very first girl I ever took out on a car date right after I turned 16. We went to a high school ball game, and then we were going to go out and eat for pizza. The problem was that when we went from the ball game and walked to the parking lot, and I came out and my dad's flaming red 75-foot Chrysler Newport was out in the parking lot, someone the tires were flat. I thought it was an accident until 3 or 4 of my friends drove by yelling and screaming and laughing, the windows open. Hey! You say, what's the problem? I would tell you the problem was that my father, as good a man as he was, never taught me how to fix a flat tire. So there I was. 16, with my license, first car date, wanting to make a good impression on Carrie Miller, unable to have any idea what to do to get that tire off and a real tire on that car. Now, what I didn't tell you was that Carrie had grown up on a farm, and she had probably changed John Deere tractors out herself. I don't know. And she did, with the least amount of humiliation, lead me through the process of how to change a tire. Like, maybe you ought to do that. And so I did it, and we went on our way, and, it wasn't particularly traumatic. And the point being that my dad didn't teach me probably everything he needed to teach me, things like changing a car tire. But man, he did teach me a lot of good things. He taught me how to respect authority. He taught me about a good work ethic. He taught me how to treat a woman. Just a lot of things. I remember just like my dad and mom saying, and they weren't real vocal about their faith, but I remember them one point in time saying, this last year we had this faith promise rally where you commit yourself to give above your regular tithe. And we did that, and we didn't think we could do it. And I just remember him telling me, wasn't a big thing, just a little story about how different ways that God provided for them. And that I remember him saying, this year, for some reason, nobody had to go to the doctor, so we had a little extra money. And I put that away as a 5th or 6th grade kid. Those are the examples that my dad set quietly and spoke quietly as he was learning in his own life to follow Christ. And he wasn't a man who was a spiritual giant in any way or form as I was growing up. So I would just say, so the first responsibility in parenting is you're growing, is that you are growing and developing as a healthy individual, spiritually and physically and mentally and socially. And let me say, because spiritual growth is that intangible thing, like am I growing? I don't know. Here's a definition of growing I'll toss out, and you put this on and see if it fits. Spiritual growth is the intentional, often painful process of surrendering specific areas of my life over to God as I learn to trust Him. And in that process, I recognize the stench of my sin, the grace of Christ, the power of the Holy Spirit, and the unconditional love of the Father. It involves taking my own gifts and my abilities and my sphere of influence and seeing if I am using them and beginning to put them into use for His kingdom, not my own. So just a simple question I ask you is that happening in your life right now as a parent, as a grandparent, as an uncle or aunt that has an influence, as a teacher in some way to some children are around you? Is that happening? So are you moving so they can move behind you? Because if you're not moving, you can't sweep kids spiritually past you. You can't get them to move in their faith and trust in Christ if you're not moving yourself, Mom and Dad. It's interesting in Psalm 78. Psalm 78 is it's really a great chapter. And it starts, it says, "O my people, listen to my instructions. Open your ears to what I'm saying. For I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you hidden lessons from our past. Stories we have heard and known. Stories our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children." Let me just tell you quickly that the rest of Psalm 78 is this. Basically, it is not a happy psalm. It's a song about the complete, desperate failures of Israel in obeying God. Over and over and over. God comes in, blesses them, gives them what they need. They remember, they're good for a few days, and then they forget, and they go back to idolatry. They go back to all kinds, they just keep failing him. And so from that, I just think there's a little parenting principle there. And I think the parental principle is that we have to tell our kids our failures as well as our successes. That sometimes we might have to think back as our child is failing in some way, that we can go and we can pull a little nugget from our past and we can say, "Hey, you know what? I know you lied, and I know that's not right. But let me tell you about a time that I lied. Let me tell you about a time that I fell. Let me tell you about a time that I didn't do the right thing. Let me tell you about a time I was mean. Let me tell you about the time I stole something. Let me tell you about the time as they get older about when I made a wrong sexual decision." And it's not always the big lesson that we can draw from that. Sometimes it's more about I failed, and Christ pulled me back up, and he will pull you back up too. Because if we continually send this message to our children, our grandchildren, that we always got it right, when they fall, guess what's going to happen? They're going to hide it. Because they believe they are living with perfect people, even though we know it's not so. Don't lead them to believe that we get it all right all the time, and we always have. That's unfair to our children, and they never learn the grace of God. Well, I've talked about for just a few minutes the idea of a walk that inspires worth. Let me share this. The second point is this. It is a way that inspires worth. A walk that inspires worth and a way that inspires worth. And the idea here is, am I shutting doors or am I opening doors to my child becoming a kingdom child and then later on a kingdom person? Am I opening doors or shutting doors? And that is this. Am I living in a way that is helping my child understand who gave those gifts to them and then how those gifts are to be used? So I was thinking about Zechariah the other day. And Zechariah, who was John the Baptist's father, Zechariah sings this song about John the Baptist and who will become. And it says in this song, in Luke 3, I believe it is, it says, "Oh, my little son." He's singing this song over his son. Now, how do you think that John the Baptist, when it says, "I have come to prepare a path of the Lord," how do you think John knew that? How do you think John knew that? There's no indication in Scripture that God comes to him and says, "You will prepare the way for the Lord." You know how he knew it? Because his dad spoke it over to him. Now, what would have happened? What would have happened if John's dad, Zechariah, sees his son growing up and goes, "Man, that guy's a great communicator. Why, he could really use that in the world in some great ways. Man, that guy's got a great will. I think he's got some leadership gifts." All those things were there. And Zechariah saw those things as a gift from God to his son, and he communicated those things to his son. You will be used greatly by God with the gifts he has given to prepare a way for the Christ. Folks, I want to talk to you just for a few minutes about something about, let's call it margins. Margins. See, when I first started ministry, someone said to me very, very wisely, said, Steve, it is very, very easy to do the ministry, to do the work of God in a way that destroys the work of God in you. Do you understand that? I mean, does that make sense to you? And see, I think I would say to you this morning that it is very, very easy to do the work of family life and parenting in a way that actually destroys our family. And when we live life hard at it, fast-paced, in fifth gear, all the time in our high RPMs, folks, with no margins in our life, bad things begin to happen. And margins are the space that we create in our life that allows God to speak into our life or to work in some way that is unexpected in our lives. And when we live life without margins, man, tough things can happen. Bad things can happen. And I would just say to you, and I just want to speak to you, primarily to our younger families, but really goes with everybody in this. My fear is that you are living life and that you are raising your families and doing family life in a way that is actually destroying your own family life. See, when we live life without margins, when we live life and we're just going, we work and then we do the activities. The next day we get up and we work and we do the activity. We're running here and we're running there and we're trying to get kids to wherever they're going, and that is our pattern of lifestyle. Listen, folks, okay, bad things happen. It erodes our convictions. We begin to make decisions just on the fly as opposed to coming back to the bedrock of our biblical convictions, all right, and making decisions out of those. Bad things happen. When we live life without margins, folks, when we're constantly just one activity after another, then it drains the time needed that is needed for the kind of the emotional intimacy needed in marriage. We talked about what happened a couple weeks ago about the time needed to create that kind of communication that creates that kind of intimacy. And I'm just going to say, guys, when you're living that way, you do not have the time to create those kind of conversations that the wife needs for that to feel loved and for that relationship to be healthy. And if that is beginning to miss in your relationship, that woman will be drained energy-wise. She will be disconnected. And men, we will not have some of the physical intimacy that we desire and is a primary way of showing respect for us. Those two things, when those two things begin to drain, when the well lowers on those things, folks, bad things happen. Primarily with couples in their 40s that I counsel, the primary issue, folks, is this. It is that they have spent the last decade following their kids with no margins in all kinds of activities, and they get to their 40s, and you know what? They have no relationship left. They are conversationless, and they are sexless, and they are roommates living in the same 2,500 square foot house, and they're not even sure if they have the energy to work at it anymore. They're strangers. And that is doing life. Although it seems honorable for those first 10 years, that is doing life in a way that is actually destroying. And that erosion is there. It doesn't just happen when you're 40. It's happening over a period of time as you're raising your children. It happens all the time. When I live life without margin, it thins me out emotionally. I begin to have big emotional reactions to small stuff. I don't have the time to process the things that happen in my life. I lose someone in my family. And I need to slow down for God to take me through the grief process. But I can't slow down because I got so much going on. So I just run, and 2 or 3 years later, I'm in depression because I haven't been able to walk out through the desert of grief with God. And anybody who has addiction or struggles with it, which is really all of us, most of us just don't know it, tiredness, fatigue is a primary trigger for addictions. We don't have the time to really fill up with what we need, and so we find all kinds of things that can be done faster and gives us a quick rush of satisfaction. And spiritually, When we're living without margins, folks, listen, as opposed to feeding ourselves, all of a sudden we get on junk food. We start reading a little 3-minute Devo. We start tossing up prayers as we're driving across town. We never sit down and allow in quietness God to speak to us. And then we come to church, and I'm just going to say this. We expect whoever's here, our worship team, or who's speaking, to just fill us up. And if we don't get filled up, we just like, wow, that wasn't as fulfilling as I thought it'd be. This was never intended. This is never intended to be the primary spiritual diet. It's got to be happening, but when you don't have margin in your life, you don't have time to open the Word. And life is so busy, and there are no margins. So there's no time for community. There's no time for that building that support system because you're so busy. That's the only night we have. And so, folks, please know, I mean, I fear for you. I fear for you as young families. And the culture has made this normal. So normal that you are probably offended by what I have just said, even though it is true. Not because I'm saying it, but because it's God's rhythm and cycle for our life. A life with margins where he is able to speak quietly to us and fill us and bring to us all the goodness that he has for us. And we can't get it because we cannot slow down. If we slow down, we don't feel like we're worth anything. We actually find our identity in that busyness. And as I begin to talk to you about stepping out of the current, that fast current of no margins, it's like you're going, oh, I don't know about, I'm uncomfortable with that. Why? Why? Because you might miss an activity? Why? Because your child's not in 3 different sports? Why? Because they may not get a scholarship. You know what the percentages are of a child getting a college sports scholarship? Minuscule. I mean, if that's your dream for your child, I'm telling you, it is. Look at the percentages. Look at the facts. It is minuscule if that's the dream. But that's not really what I want to talk about. What I really want to do, I don't want to just be against something. This is not against sports. I grew up in a sports home. I understand the benefits of sports and the benefits of activities, and I get that. This is not against those. This is filling our lives with so much and filling our children's lives. Because, folks, listen, when we get to that point, we are teaching our children this is what life is supposed to look like. Busyness, foot on the pedal, all the time going. And we decrease those margins for them where we create children who are unable to hear the voice of God, and they are living by their own agenda, and they forget the giver, and they start using all these gifts and abilities for their own versus God. Oh, that's sad. God has so much to bring to them. But it's not just about pulling back. It's about what we're plugging into, or what we need to be plugging into. And there is a there's a wave. I'm just going to say this, and you may not like it, and I promise you I say this in love. There is a cultural wave where regular church attendance is maybe 2 weeks a month. And everybody says, it's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. And I'm going to say to you as your leader, as one of your leaders, that's ground I'm not ready to give up yet. It's ground I'm not ready, and here's why. Not because you are any more spiritual if you're here 4 times a month or 6 months. That's not what it's about. It's because of this. Please hear this. Because what we are doing and what we are involved in is the single most important cause in the world. It is where your children will find their identity in serving God for his purposes. It is a single greatest cause. We have a call. I have a call in our church for us to be a light and a beacon and a voice in this community to help the lost. And folks, you are gifted to be a part of that. And if you're just checking in a couple every once in a while and hearing a sermon and then checking back out, or listen, that's not what God has in mind. That is not what God has in mind. The truth of the fact is we had this vision for this church I have this vision for this church where people are coming and they are accepting Christ and being saved, and they are learning to grow, and they are finding the grace of God, and there's healing taking place, encouraging, and it's happening from little dudes to older folks. And you know what? That can't happen. That vision will not happen if just the staff is working their rears off. That has got to happen with you doing your part. And I'm just saying, you can't just check in a couple times a week, sing a couple songs, hear a sermon, and head back out there and go, yeah, I love my church. I'm saying, I love you. And I'm begging you to start thinking about creating some margin in your life. And I am asking you to become a vital part of what is going on here. To put some things aside so you can be involved in the greatest cause ever known to man. Why we are built and why we are formed and why we are created. That's what I'm asking you to do. And I know that's a tough challenge. Please know it is out of a heart that loves you. I know it's going to be a hard decision. I know it's so counterculture. But listen, man, we got people in our community, we got people going to hell, and we've got the answer. But we need your help in bringing your gifts to this and making this happen. So that's my challenge to you. And thanks for listening this morning. I appreciate it. Here's a couple of things. Put my notes up here. I'm going to ask you to name one thing that as a parent you need to surrender so that you can begin to grow, so your kids can begin to follow. I'm going to ask that. What's the name? What's the next word on there? Oh, next. I'm going to ask that you play this game. I'm going to ask that you play this game. The game is called Starting Over. Here's what you do. I do it in leadership sometimes in my own business, in my own ministry schedule. I just start to act like I got no commitments whatsoever. I don't have any activities. I have nothing. If I'm just starting over to the starting line, what would I do? What would I place in my life, and what would I cut out? I've got, complete. I got the knife. I can cut, I can paste, whatever. You do that with your family. If we were just starting over, what would we do again? If we were starting with God's agenda to be God's family, what would we do again? Play that game. It's actually quite an adventure. Number 3, cut it. Cut one activity. Cut one activity from your family life. Something that will just begin to give you a little margin. The last one is give it. And that is this. I'm going to give you a practical thing. In the month of December, you have an opportunity to change the world by helping us send a family to another family doing global missions work and encouraging them and lifting up, and also to help under-resourced people for the next year. We're going to raise $30,000 in our Christmas offering this year. That's what we need to meet those two needs. You sit down with your family. Don't just write a check. You sit down with your family and say, hey, how can we all come together and get a little and come together and help and use our resources for the kingdom purposes? That's my challenge to you.